Picture this. It's 1969, and a California Pontiac dealer mechanic stumbles across a parts catalog entry that shouldn't exist. What he discovers will expose one of Detroit's best-kept performance secrets and create the most dominant street machines the West Coast has ever seen. This is the story of Jim Taylor, the mechanic who outsmarted Pontiac with experimental cylinder heads that were never supposed to leave the factory. The late 1960s were the absolute peak of American muscle car madness. Detroit was in an all-out war for horsepower supremacy, and Pontiac was right in the thick of it. Their RamAir 4 engine was already a legend, 400 cubic inches of pure aggression, making 370 horsepower from the factory, though everyone knew that number was conservative. Street racers from Van Nuys to Oakland feared the distinctive hood scoops of a RamAir 4 GTO or Firebird pulling up next to them at a stoplight. But hidden in Pontiac's engineering department was something even more radical, something that made the RamAir 4 look tame by comparison. Jim Taylor wasn't your typical grease monkey. Working at a Pontiac dealership in Southern California, he had a reputation for building engines that embarrassed cars costing 3 times as much. He understood airflow like a Formula One engineer understands aerodynamics. While other mechanics were content bolting on headers and calling it a day, Taylor was porting heads with a die grinder, matching intake runners, and calculating compression ratios in his sleep. He knew every part number in the Pontiac performance catalog, which is why when he spotted an unusual listing for service replacement cylinder heads with the designation RamAir V, he knew something didn't add up. The RamAir 4 was Pontiac's top dog. There was no RamAir V in production, not officially anyway. Taylor started digging. He called contacts at Pontiac Engineering. He talked to racers who had connections in Detroit. What he uncovered was automotive gold. Pontiac had indeed developed RamAir V cylinder heads, but they were never meant for public consumption. These were experimental pieces developed for the Trans Am Racing Series, where Pontiac was getting its doors blown off by Chevrolet's Z28 Camaros and Ford's Boss 302 Mustangs. The engineers at Pontiac had created something revolutionary, tunnel port intake runners that flowed air like nothing else in their arsenal. Here's where it gets interesting. In traditional cylinder head design, the intake ports follow a relatively straight path from the intake manifold to the valve. It's efficient, it works, but it has limitations. The RamAir V heads threw that playbook out the window. The intake ports were massive tunnels that curved dramatically through the head casting. Think of it like the difference between breathing through a straw versus breathing through a paper towel tube. The tunnel port design allowed for ports that were not only larger in cross-section, but also had a more direct shot at the back of the intake valve. The numbers were staggering. Where a good RamAir 4 head flowed about 270 cubic feet per minute at 500-inch valve lift, these RamAir V heads were pushing over 400 CFM. That's a 50% improvement in airflow. In the world of naturally aspirated engines, airflow is everything. More air means more fuel can be burned, which means more power. It's that simple and that complicated all at once. But here's the kicker. Pontiac had manufactured 200 sets of these experimental heads. They were cast, machined, and sitting in a warehouse. The Trans Am program they were developed for got canceled when General Motors issued its infamous racing ban in January 1970. GM's board of directors, worried about safety concerns and insurance backlash, pulled the plug on all factory-sponsored racing activities. Overnight, millions of dollars in racing development became orphaned parts with no official purpose. Except they were still in the system, listed as service parts for warranty replacement, though what customer would ever need to warranty replace cylinder heads that were never officially installed on any production car? It was a bureaucratic loophole, and Jim Taylor was about to drive a 500-horsepower muscle car right through it. Taylor placed an order for 10 sets of RamAir V heads. The parts department didn't question it. He was ordering through proper channels with legitimate part numbers. At $100 per set, they weren't even particularly expensive. Remember, these were considered service parts, not special performance equipment. For the price of a decent paint job, Taylor had just acquired the keys to Pontiac's racing kingdom. Now, bolting these heads onto an engine wasn't as simple as it sounds. The tunnel port design required specific intake manifolds that barely existed. The valve train geometry was different. The compression ratios would change dramatically. These heads were designed for race gas, not pump fuel. Taylor had to essentially reverse engineer Pontiac's canceled racing program from scratch. He started with a 400 cubic inch Pontiac block, the same foundation as the RamAir 4, but that's where the similarities ended. The stock forged pistons wouldn't work with the RamAir V's combustion chamber shape. Taylor had to source custom pistons that would provide the right compression ratio, around 11.51, which was radical for a street engine. The standard RamAir cam profile was too mild for heads that could flow this much air. He needed something with more duration, more lift, more overlap. The factory intake manifold was a joke compared to what these heads could handle. Taylor fabricated custom intake runners that could feed these hungry ports. The first engine Taylor built with the RamAir V heads was a revelation. On the engine dyno with proper tuning and race fuel, it pulled 535 horsepower. Let that sink in for a moment. In 1969, when a factory 426 Hemi was rated at 425 horsepower and actually made maybe 470 at the crank, Taylor's Pontiac was making 535. This wasn't some wild, undrivable race motor either. It idled rough, but not terribly. It could be driven on the street with 103-octane fuel, and it looked completely stock. From the outside, Taylor installed this first engine in a 1969 Firebird. Plain white, steel wheels, no stripes, no scoops, nothing to indicate what lurked under the hood. This was the ultimate sleeper, and it was about to terrorize the California street racing scene. The West Coast street racing culture of 1969 was unlike anything before or since. Vietnam was raging, muscle cars were cheap, and gasoline was 32 cents a gallon. Every Friday and Saturday night, Sunset Strip, Van Nuys Boulevard, and dozens of other spots became impromptu drag strips. Pink slips were actually wagered. Reputations were made and destroyed in 11-second quarters. And suddenly there was this white Firebird that nobody could touch. Word spread fast in the street racing community. Guys with big block Chevelles were getting walked. Mopars with 446 packs were seeing taillights. Even the occasional Hemi got embarrassed. Nobody could figure out what Taylor had done. They knew it was a Pontiac 400. They could hear it wasn't running nitrous, but it pulled like nothing they'd seen from Pontiac before. The smart money started following Taylor to the track, watching his technique, listening to his engine. Some noticed the unique header primary length he was running. Others picked up on the radical cam timing. But nobody suspected the real secret was in cylinder heads that Pontiac themselves claimed didn't exist. Taylor wasn't content with just one build. With 9 more sets of RamAir V heads, he started taking orders. But he was selective. These weren't parts for rich kids wanting to impress their friends. Taylor would only sell complete engines to serious racers who understood what they were getting. The price was steep, $3,500 for a complete dyno-tested engine in 1970, when you could buy a brand-new GTO for $3,200. But for those who could afford it, they were buying guaranteed domination. Each engine Taylor built was slightly different, tuned for its specific application. A GTO destined for street racing got a milder cam and 10.5.1 compression, so it could run on premium pump gas mixed with a little octane booster. A Firebird built for the drag strip got the full treatment, 12.1 compression, solid lifter cam with 0.600-inch lift, and headers that cost more than most complete exhaust systems. That particular car ran 10.80s in the quarter mile, which in 1970 was faster than most professional stock eliminator cars. The fascinating part about the RamAir V heads wasn't just their performance, but their design philosophy. Pontiac engineers had essentially looked at Ford's tunnel port 427 heads and Chrysler's Hemi design and asked, what if we combined the best of both? The result was ports that were larger than Ford's but with better velocity and chambers that promoted swirl like a Hemi but didn't require the complex valve train. The intake ports were 2.5 inches tall by 1.75 inches wide at the gasket surface. That's massive. For comparison, a standard RamAir Ivor port was 2.11 by 1.77 inches. But it wasn't just about size. The port floor had a pronounced ski jump effect that directed air up and over the valve guide, reducing turbulence. The exhaust ports were equally impressive, with a D-shaped design that promoted scavenging. These weren't just bigger ports, they were better ports. The combustion chambers were another piece of engineering art. At 87 cc's, they were smaller than RamAir 4 chambers, which helped bump compression. But the shape was what mattered. The plug was centrally located for optimal flame travel. The squish areas were carefully designed to promote turbulence without causing detonation. The valve angles were changed to unshroud the valves at high lift. Every detail showed that Pontiac's engineers understood racing engines at a level that wouldn't become common knowledge for another decade. But why did Pontiac even develop these heads if they never intended to release them? The answer lies in the cutthroat world of Trans Am racing. By 1969, Pontiac was getting embarrassed on road courses. Their engines made torque, but couldn't rev like the small blocks from Ford and Chevy. The tunnel port heads were designed to let the Pontiac 303, a destroked version of their 400, rev to 8,000 RPM and make power up there. Internal documents from Pontiac engineering show they were targeting 485 horsepower at 7,500 RPM from the Trans Am engine, which would have been competitive with anything on the circuit. GM's racing ban killed the program, but not before those 200 sets of heads were cast and machined. The official story was that they were destroyed. The reality was that bureaucracy saved them. Listed in the parts system as experimental service parts, they sat in a warehouse waiting for someone like Jim Taylor to discover them. As 1970 rolled on, Taylor's reputation grew to legendary status. He was invited to private street races with stakes as high as $10,000. His white Firebird, now known as the Ghost in racing circles, was specifically banned from certain events because nobody wanted to race it. Taylor didn't mind. He had proven his point. With intelligence, research, and a little bit of luck, one mechanic had outsmarted the entire Pontiac division. The story takes an interesting turn in late 1970. Pontiac officials finally caught wind of what Taylor was doing. There were two schools of thought in the corporation. The marketing guys loved it. Here was proof that Pontiac engines could dominate even without factory support. The legal department had a different view. These were experimental parts, never certified for street use, and if someone got hurt, the liability could be enormous. A Pontiac zone manager was dispatched to California to meet with Taylor. The conversation, as Taylor later recounted, was surprisingly cordial. Pontiac wasn't going to pursue legal action, but they wanted the remaining RamAir V heads accounted for. Taylor still had 4 sets. The zone manager made him an offer: return the heads, no questions asked, and Pontiac would provide him with support for his legitimate racing efforts. Taylor countered with his own proposal. He'd keep the heads but would never advertise them as genuine. Pontiac parts, they'd be Taylor Engineering cylinder heads as far as the public was concerned. The compromise worked. Taylor kept building engines with the RamAir V heads, but now he was even more selective about his customers. The heads became mythical in Pontiac circles. Rumors spread about their capabilities, growing with each telling. Some claimed they made 600 horsepower. Others said they were cast from a special alloy that NASA developed. The truth was impressive enough without embellishment. By 1971, the muscle car era was dying. Insurance rates had skyrocketed. The Clean Air Act was forcing manufacturers to detune engines. Gas prices were climbing. The RamAir V-heads became even more valuable as they represented the absolute peak of Pontiac performance, a level that would never be reached again in the classic era. Taylor still had 2 complete sets that he refused to sell, knowing their value would only increase. The technical legacy of the RamAir V-heads extended far beyond their limited production. The lessons learned from their design influenced cylinder head development for decades. The concept of larger ports with proper velocity management became standard practice. The combustion chamber design showed up in modified form on later Pontiac heads. Even today, cylinder head porters study the RamAir V design to understand airflow principles. In the modern performance world, original RamAir V heads are the holy grail of Pontiac parts. A complete, verified set can sell for $10,000 to $15,000. But it's not just about money. These heads represent something more. They're proof that Detroit's engineers were capable of far more than corporate policies allowed them to produce. They're tangible evidence of what could have been if the muscle car wars had continued unabated. Several companies now make reproduction RamAir V heads using modern casting techniques and materials. These reproductions flow even better than the originals, pushing 430 CFM at 600-inch lift. But for purists, nothing matches the originals. It's not just about performance, it's about owning a piece of hidden history, a secret that wasn't supposed to escape Detroit. Jim Taylor's story resonates because it represents the best of American hot-rodding ingenuity. He didn't have a huge corporation behind him. He didn't have millions in development money. He had knowledge, determination, and the ability to see opportunity where others saw obsolete parts. He took what Pontiac abandoned and turned it into something legendary. The engines Taylor built are still out there, some still in the cars he originally installed them in. Owners report that even after 50 years, with proper maintenance, these engines still make incredible power. The quality of Taylor's machine work, his attention to detail in assembly, means these engines have survived where others have failed. They're rolling monuments to what one determined mechanic could accomplish. What happened to the Trans Am program the RamAir V-heads were designed for? Pontiac engineers had actually built several complete 303 cubic inch Trans Am engines with the tunnel port heads. Testing at GM's Milford Proving Grounds showed they were producing 485 horsepower at 7,500 RPM on the dyno, with potential for more development. Track testing in modified Firebirds showed lap times that would have been competitive with the best from Ford and Chevrolet. All that development, all that potential, killed by a corporate memo. The irony is that Chevrolet was allowed to continue selling performance parts through their off-the-books racing programs, while Pontiac, which had always been more rebellious, more performance-oriented, was forced to comply completely with the racing ban. Those RamAir V-heads represented Pontiac's last grasp at racing glory before the doors were shut. In the broader context of automotive history, the RamAir V story illustrates a crucial turning point. The 1960s represented unlimited optimism in Detroit. Engineers were given free rein to develop increasingly powerful engines with no thought to fuel economy or emissions. The RamAir V heads were perhaps the ultimate expression of this philosophy. Massive ports, high compression, race fuel required, built for one purpose only: maximum power. By 1973, it was all over. Compression ratios dropped to 8.1. Net horsepower ratings replaced gross ratings, showing the public how much power was really being lost to accessories and exhaust restrictions. The RamAir V heads became not just obsolete, but almost archaeological artifacts from a different era. They represented a mindset that would never return to Detroit. Taylor continued working on Pontiacs through the 1970s and 1980s, but he often said nothing ever matched the excitement of those RamAir V builds. The combination of secrecy, performance, and the underground nature of the whole operation created an aura that couldn't be replicated. He kept one complete RamAir V engine in his shop, never installed, occasionally firing it up on the dyno just to remind himself what real Pontiac power sounded like. The story of Jim Taylor and the RamAir V heads teaches us something important about innovation. The best ideas don't always come from corporate boardrooms or massive R&D budgets. Sometimes they come from one person recognizing opportunity and having the courage to pursue it. Taylor saw what Pontiac's own executives couldn't or wouldn't see, that hidden in their parts warehouse was the key to domination. Today, when everything is computerized, when engine development involves millions of dollars in CAD software and flow benches that cost more than houses, it's worth remembering that Jim Taylor did it with intuition, experience, and a few phone calls to the right people. He didn't need corporate approval or a development team. He just needed to understand airflow and combustion better than anyone else in California. The RamAir V heads remain the most valuable Pontiac performance parts ever produced, not just in monetary terms, but in what they represent. They're proof that American engineers could compete with anyone in the world when unleashed. They're evidence that the muscle car era could have continued evolving if not for external forces. Most importantly, they're a testament to the idea that one person with knowledge and determination can outsmart an entire corporation. For those lucky enough to own original RamAir V heads today, they possess more than just rare parts. They own a piece of secret history, components that Pontiac claimed didn't exist, that were never supposed to reach the public but did because one mechanic in California was smart enough to recognize their potential and brave enough to exploit it. The legend of Jim Taylor's RamAir V engines lives on in every Pontiac performance build today. When modern builders port heads to extreme dimensions, when they push compression ratios to the edge of pump gas limitations, when they chase that last tenth in the quarter mile, they're following the path Taylor blazed with those tunnel port heads. He showed that factory limitations were just suggestions, that with enough knowledge and determination, you could build something that exceeded even what the manufacturers thought possible. What's the rarest engine you've ever encountered? Was it hidden in plain sight like these RamAir V heads, or was it something everyone knew was special from day one? The beauty of automotive history is that there are still secrets out there, still barn finds waiting to be discovered, still stories like Jim Taylor's waiting to be told. The next time you're at a swap meet and see some odd-looking cylinder heads that don't match any casting number you recognize, remember Taylor's story. You might just be looking at the next legendary discovery. Keep your eyes open, keep learning, and who knows? Maybe you'll be the next person to outsmart Detroit with their own parts.